Hi, it's John, and welcome to the channel. 5:27 a.m. Thursday, October the 2nd. I hope you're having a great day today. I certainly am. Got my big blue mug of coffee with me, ready to head back upstairs and refresh that in just a few minutes. But I want to talk to you about a story that I first saw yesterday. Well, Western Standard sent me an email. I think it was like breaking in my email, talking about this new plan by Premier Danielle Smith, the province of Alberta, to get a pipeline to the West Coast. And the Western Standard, I'll show you a bit of their article in just a moment, seem very optimistic about this. I applaud the Premier for trying to come up with a plan to do this. But the thing and the phrase that came to my mind regarding this is she's pissing up a rope because nothing has changed. I watched an interview. I'm going to show you a clip in just a second. I watched an interview between her and Vashi Kapelas on CTV talking about this new plan. And it was like deja vu all over again. It was like an interview I watched between the same two women. I think it was back in June, July, August, September, October. So we're four to 5 months into this. Nothing has changed. Nothing at all. All of the same barriers are in the way that were before. And people seem to be optimistic about this plan going forward. Now, I'm just going to say to you, and I hate to be complimentary of Mark Carney, but he played this perfectly, like a master. Danielle Smith, in the interview with Vashi Kapelas just yesterday, mentioned that the ball is in Mark Carney's court. And Mark Carney isn't returning the ball, folks. He set up all the barriers to get in the way of an Alberta pipeline months ago. He's been setting it up forever because he doesn't want a pipeline, and there will be no pipeline.
We will not impose a project on a province. We need consensus behind these projects, and we need the participation of Indigenous peoples. We will only do that in the case where we have the support of First Nations. We have the support of all the provinces coming together with consensus.
That old word consensus comes up again. Has anybody, any province, any government been able to agree on everything in this country? And there's just no way this is going to happen. There's too many barriers here getting in the way of this pipeline. You know, God love Danielle Smith for trying, but she's going to have to finally get to the end game here. When none of this happens, what is Danielle Smith prepared to do? And that's what I thought I would find that out weeks ago when the 6 months were up regarding those different demands she had of the government. Let's take a look at the Western Standard story here quickly. Editorial: Alberta takes charge. Time for a new pipeline to the West Coast. Alberta's government has stepped up to lead a fresh push for a pipeline to British Columbia's coast. Premier Danielle Smith announced the move in Calgary, tapping experts from Enbridge, South Bow, and Trans Mountain to map a route. It doesn't say here that they are investing in this at all. This isn't just talk. It's a smart strategy to hand off a de-risk project to private investors, avoiding past pitfalls like the Keystone XL mess that cost Alberta $1.3 billion. Here's Danielle Smith talking a little bit about this with Vashi Kapelas.
Well, it's 14 million. And I think that the reason is because a proponent has told us that they cannot get companies lined up to ship on their pipeline as long as we continue to have a tanker ban, an emissions cap, and some of the other bad laws that are in place. And so we know that it's going to take our work to make sure that the federal government repeals or in some way revises those bad laws substantially. And to get to that point, we want to make sure that there's some of the technical work being done in the meantime. The ball's going to be in Prime Minister Mark Carney's court.
She says that a lot in this interview on how the ball is in Mark Carney's court, which just sickens me because Alberta, our premier, is basically begging the Liberal government, Ottawa, and Mark Carney to get a pipeline because we got to go through them, folks, in order to get this done. And Carney's created all the circumstances to not have a pipeline. And instead of getting rid of the laws that she talked about there, they created another law on top of laws, Bill C-5. So now it's up to Carney to be the decider of what goes on in this country. It's just, I used to have teachers that used to write BSBB on the chalkboard. BS baffles brains, and that's what this is all about. Back to the article from the Western Standard. Fiscal Sense seals the deal. Alberta's ponying up just $14 million for early planning, not owning the pipe, but prepping it for private hands. Sources told the Globe and Mail that Bill C-48's tanker ban blocks companies from leading applications, so the province is stepping in to slash legal risks. Smart move, and Indigenous involvement starts now. Leaders like Chief Raymond Powder of Fort Mackay First Nation and Dale Swampy of the National Coalition of Chiefs praise the early engagement. As Swampy noted, this drives economic reconciliation through ownership stakes. And this was discussed with Vashi Kapella's huge barrier in the way of the pipeline.
So is it your impression from those proponents that they believe if, for example, all those irritants in the form of those laws are removed, that there will be a proponent for this pipeline? Because, again, they will still be up against, for example, coastal First Nations, which just released a press release saying, as the rights and title holders of BC's North and Central Coast and Haida Gwaii, we must inform Premier Smith once again that there is no support from coastal First Nations for a pipeline and oil tankers project in our coastal waters. Like, that opposition doesn't disappear, even if Mark Carney does everything you want him to.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I have a very skilled Indigenous relations minister who's very sensitive to the fact that any major project that goes forward has to have Indigenous ownership as the foundation. That's a bit different than it was 10 years ago, that we're beginning with the conversation about how we can get to a yes.
Danielle Smith is trying to work with Indigenous people, but there's just too many barriers, and the way Vashi Kapella's actually addressed that in this interview with Premier Smith.
And I do understand your point about endeavoring to change that. And if it were, 1 or 5 or even 10 First Nations that had expressed some opposition to this, I can, envision a path forward. But I think it was 61 First Nations 10 years ago that expressed opposition, so much so that they took it all the way through the courts and ultimately got a decision in their favor. How much taxpayer money are you willing to bet on something like this when the track record is what it is?
You can see on her face there that Danielle Smith knows her back's up against the wall, and she's eventually going to have to come to the end game, as I mentioned with Mark Carney. You haven't done this, so national unity crisis, which I did a video on just the other day. But Indigenous groups, it's almost like extortion. Do you get that feeling? Extortion is threatening somebody unless you get an economic payoff, and that's kind of what Indigenous groups do in this country. You give us money or else you don't get what you want. And that's where we are right now. I've said for months, provinces and Indigenous groups that get in the way of building things that make life more prosperous in this country should not benefit from the prosperity of this country. We should start slowly cutting them off from any transfer payments or any benefit they get from the rest of the country if they get in the way. So I'm jumping in here after I had already cut my video and edited it. And I wanted to include this in because this is David Eby after Danielle Smith did this announcement regarding this plan. And the only way to describe what David Eby is doing here, he's basically telling Danielle Smith in the province of Alberta to go fuck itself. Eby is all in with Mark Carney, all in with his major projects office, which is located here in Calgary. This is just proof that nothing is going to happen when it comes to a pipeline between Alberta and the British Columbia coast.
Neighborly relations are crucial between Alberta and British Columbia. And that's a relationship that needs to go both ways. British Columbia has literally tens of billions of dollars of real private sector shovel-ready projects that are going to drive forward not just our economy here in BC, but the national economy at a time that the national economy is under direct threat and attack by Donald Trump. Now, the problem that we have is that Premier Smith continues to advance a project that is entirely taxpayer funded, has no private sector proponent, is not a real project, and is incredibly alarming to British Columbians, including First Nations along the coast, whose support is required for the success of the billions of dollars in real projects that I'm talking about. We need a major projects office at the federal level, not a major distractions office, not a major politics office, but an office that advances real shovel-ready projects that will move this economy forward in British Columbia and nationally. And what I am seeing from Alberta directly threatens that.
There is no investment right now, and there is no proponent, and there is no pipeline, despite what Danielle Smith is doing here. Tim Hodgson, Energy Minister, has weighed in on this. This is from the CTV.
We are building Canada strong. The statement starts off by saying, and that means any project brought forward by a proponent will be evaluated against the same rules for all proponents. If Alberta wishes to be the initial proponent and funder of a pipeline to the West Coast and put it forward to the MPO, that is within their right to do so. We have an active and constructive dialogue with Alberta, the statement goes on to say, and we'll always look for ways to advance shared priorities. We have listed Pathways Plus as a transformative strategy for Canada and have been clear that a pipeline project must move forward in conjunction with the Pathways project, which will decarbonize our oil sands to the equivalent of taking over 4.75 million cars off the road.
So she actually mentions, I'm talking about Danielle Smith in this interview that she did with Vashi Capella. She says she wants to change the climate when it comes to investment in pipelines. This has got a lot to do with climate, but it's not investment. It's why we can't have nice things anymore. And listen, we'll hear Hodgson, the final part of what he wrote here.
Concludes by saying building major projects includes meaningful consultations with Indigenous rights holders, working with all affected jurisdictions, and alignment with Canada's objective with respect to climate change and clean growth. Once any proponent has done this work, the federal government is open to evaluating a project on its merits.
So there you go. All of the things are in the way there. Okay, you've got the provinces, you've got the Indigenous groups, you've got the climate thing there, you've got Mark Carney and the federal government in the way. All of these things are in the way. Nothing's going to get done. At the end of this interview, Danielle Smith goes back and repeats what she said before.
It's going to be up to Prime Minister Carney whether or not he wants to work with us on being able to advance these kinds of projects or not.
Mark Carney. Mark Carney is the decider, folks, of everything that happens in the province of Alberta. I can bring up Alberta independence here. People often say, and the argument is, well, you'd be in the same boat if Alberta were independent. Well, no, we would have the federal government out of the way because we'd be our own country. We would have more bargaining power as far as I'm concerned because British Columbia would now be isolated from the rest of the country. And we could say to British Columbia, play ball with us, or we can just cut off the 3 or 4 roads that run between British Columbia and the rest of the country. And there's only 3 or 4 roads, folks. You either play ball with us or you might as well shut down your port in Vancouver because everything will have to be shipped through the United States of America because not a damn stick of wood, not one product will go through Alberta until you play ball with us. We could do that. We can't do that right now because we've got to go through the federal government, and we're begging the federal government for our prosperity here in this province. Sorry to be so damn negative about this. Danielle Smith knows who Mark Carney is. She's not stupid. The look on her face through that interview with Vashi, look at the look on her face here. The look on her face, she realizes that this is a futile activity. She knows who Mark Carney is. Here she is talking about him.
Given that the new Prime Minister is a whole new level of climate zealot and eco-extremist. From his decades-long push for net zero banking that sought to make it impossible for banks to invest in oil and gas, to his promise now to massively increase carbon taxes on our industry, make no mistake, he wants to eviscerate our oil and gas industry. It's right in his book.
Danielle Smith knows who he is. I just want to know what the end game is here. Where does this end? She gave the 6 months. She's extended it. She's now trying with this project. I am not optimistic that this will ever happen. I am not optimistic that a pipeline will ever happen until Alberta goes on its own. Is that where we're going with Danielle Smith? And I said months ago, we need a leader of the independence movement out here. I talked to Mitch Sylvester. You can watch his video. And in fact, I put up a video of Jeff Rath, Dennis Modry, and Mitch Sylvester kind of encapsulating all of their interviews, where I asked him about this, and he said, no, it's done by design. I don't know. Danielle Smith, the leader of the independence movement out here? Wouldn't that be something? But I just don't ever see a pipeline going through, not with all of the barriers in the way. And the biggest barrier is Mark Carney and the government because he, as Danielle Smith said, it's up to him. Thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.